Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How you doing, Ken?
I'm good. Thanks for asking, Rory. Rory and I hope that you are well. You've joined us for the Counselling Tutor Podcast, episode 253. And today we are going to be delving into theory and practice, where we look at a piece of theory, look at how does that come alive in practice. And today, something I know you're all going to love, it's the different types of counselling supervision. Are you getting the most from yours? Secondly, we're going into practice today. That's when we look at what is current, what is going on right now in our world that affects us as counsellors or maybe our clients. And we're going to be speaking about the counselling in tough economic times, and as we're making this in real time, there is a squeeze on, and it affects us as counsellors, but it also affects our clients. How does that show itself in the therapy room? And then in Practice Matters today, that's our CPD section that you can log your CPD hours for listening to this section here. We have an interview. It's a peek into practice, where we're going to look over the shoulder of a fellow practitioner who practices in REBT. That's Rational Emotive Behaviour Therapy, and that's Ruth Hill that you met up with, Rory, and did an interview with. So we're going to hear all about that. But let's start off with that theory and practice, different types of supervision, Rory.
Yes, it's an interesting one, isn't it? And well, I think it's an interesting one because when I first started counselling, I never come across the term supervision. I came from a commercial background and I've really never heard that term, or I'd never really taken any time to think about it. And of course, when I was doing my studies, supervision was kind of put over to me and the other students as clinical supervision, where you took your client work and you saw an external supervisor, and you were accountable for your work and you gained support in your work. And I think a lot of therapists would think that was what supervision is. But when I moved in and worked in the sort of social environment in the third sector, I soon realised that supervision was a catch-all term for, if you like, accountability, and there are different types of supervision. And I can remember, taking my first job as a support worker and going to supervision, and I was really surprised that it was absolutely nothing like my clinical supervision for my counselling. It was managerial supervision, where it was about holidays and targets and performance and key performance indicators and all that type of thing. And I think it's useful for anybody who's coming into the profession and certainly looks to maybe getting work in the profession to understand that supervision is a catch-all term. Yeah. And there are different types of supervision. So, we've talked about clinical supervision. We've talked about managerial supervision, where you see a manager and they talk about holidays, performance, client loads, that type of thing. And then you have group supervision, where you may want to meet up as a group and be supervised in a group of your peers. And then, interestingly enough, Ken, we have specialist supervision, where you may have a specific discipline and I'm thinking of eye movement desensitization and reprogramming. I can never get the initials right, you know. Yes, thank you.
No worries.
Jumble about in my dyslexic head.
I get it.
And you know, I supervise a supervisee who comes to me for general practice, but has another supervisor for her EMDR practice because it's a specific discipline. So I think it's useful just to kind of explore the different forms of supervision and realize that there's just more than one.
There is, yes. And it's a really interesting topic because there is another flavor of supervision as well, and that's the own internal supervisor. We've spoken about that in podcasts before, where we kind of helicopter above the practice that's going on in the present moment within the room, and we're kind of aware of the ethics and what the client is bringing and the contract that we have with that client. So we're kind of not just there with them, we're also kind of helicoptering in self-supervisor as it is called. I think it's interesting because if we look at the different kinds of supervision, you'll notice that they're there for very different reasons. So your managerial supervision is about the running of the organization, the measuring of what is working, what is not working, team working, clinical practice. That's what's going to be covered. Now, you may take elements of that into your own supervision as well. Now, the difference might be if you had a frustration with the organization that you worked within, maybe you'd be taking that to your clinical supervisor, and part of self-care kind of having somewhere where you can speak about that and look with a peer at how you might approach that. The other thing that you mentioned, Rory, in terms of different types of supervision, and I think this is really important, is those specialist areas. In February of 2001, one of the ethical organizations in the United Kingdom, it's called the BACP, or the British Association of Counselling and Psychotherapy, they introduced a new framework for supervisors, an ethical framework that supervisors should work to. And they've clearly distinguished specialist competences within that framework for supervisors. And if you're working in a certain area, then you should be seeing a supervisor who has the competences in that area. You used EDMR, Rory, in your example there. You didn't train in EDMR, so you're not there and able to supervise. But there are some hidden potholes within that as well. Specifically right now, there's a massive turn to online working. This came from a pandemic causing us to need to go and do that. The ethical framework requires that you should have training in working online to be able to work online. But it also now suggests that if you go to a supervisor, that supervisor should have the competencies and they are specialist competencies laid out in the framework to be able to assist you with your online working, because it's very, very different. It might not feel different, and that, I think, can be a slippery area where you think, oh, well, I'm looking for a supervisor, and I don't mind if I meet them online, and I've got a few online clients, and just picking a supervisor without asking those questions about those specialist competencies that they need to hold.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because since 2019, the online world has expanded. It's just exploded. It's blown up. And as such, there was a lot of people initially who came on to online work unsure of, what the differences are. And that can range from the technology you use right across to the specific psychological processes that can manifest themselves when working online. So ethical bodies, all ethical bodies under the Professional Standards Authority, where ethical bodies sit now, they sit under the Professional Standards Authority, all the ethical bodies suggested that practitioners do some online training. And supervisors, should be trained, if they're working with people who are working online, to be able to understand that, because you need to understand that the totality of someone's practice. And I want to say something about specialisms. There are areas of more technical counselling, and I'm thinking of our colleagues in maybe the transactional analysis world who'd apply specific theories to work with clients within a contracting environment, such as script analysis or working in the Cartman drama triangle, or contracting for staying in the adult. And if someone's working as a TA therapist, a trained TA therapist, the supervision should match that, so that the therapist has a really good understanding of how these, and I use the word technical, I think it's a pretty good use of words, to how it's applied. How are you applying script analysis and what's happening? And is there, have you got script rebound, which is something that sometimes happens in transactional analysis, where someone pushes back against trying to change their life script. So I think it's really important that when you, and I think this comes down, Ken, to one of my biggest gripes, is that therapists should be free to choose their clinical supervisor.
Oh, yeah.
I've always said this when I was taught, 2 decades ago, the emphasis on find yourself a supervisor that works for you. As we'd say to clients, find a therapist that fits with you. Because if you're working with a supervisor and you feel inhibited, or you feel you can't bring the totality of your practice, ultimately that impacts on your client, because you cannot be the total of your practice within supervision.
100%. It is so important. And looking back just a few years, really, when you look to a practitioner who had a supervisor, generally they would have a supervisor.
Yes.
However, now it is not uncommon for a practitioner to have multiple supervisors, 2 supervisors, sometimes even more. And it's about taking those special competence areas to the person who holds those competences. I looked up as we were talking, Rory, the specialist areas that are identified. And this is just the BACP that I'm quoting here, based in the UK. And of course, you'd need to look to your ethical body or the ethical bodies that you have in your country or your area, or who you work to see what that looks like there. But the additional subject areas are working creatively, so creative working. And that's interesting, because I didn't train in creative working. And if I had a supervisee who came to me about creativity in their practice, I would struggle to be there, because I don't fully get it. I can maybe go partially down that road, but I can't go all the way down that road with them. Group supervision, that is a specialist area. If you are a supervisor, train as a supervisor, going straight into group supervision without additional CPD is not smart, because it's different. It's like counselling and couples counselling, or group counselling, or family counselling. They differ. The techniques you will use will differ. The way that you manage the environment and hold the space differs. Online and phone supervision, which we've spoken about at the moment. Supervising in an organizational context, which we've kind of touched on as well, but there are specialist areas that you would need to look into there. Supervising work with children and young adults, so important. As a supervisor, if a supervisee approached me and they worked in a school, in a primary school, let's say, they would not be a good fit for me. However, they'd be a good fit for you, Rory, because you have studied in that area. Supervising trauma is another area. If you have a supervisee who is working in, call it the front line, where there is a lot of trauma in the work that they're doing, have you as a supervisor trained in that area? Supervising therapists working with interpreters. We spoke about interpreters in a very recent podcast, not that far back. I can't remember the episode, of 2 or 3 weeks ago. Go and have a look for it. Again, it's a specialist training area in supervision. So different flavors to supervision, I guess, as counseling and psychotherapy matures into the world that we live in today, Rory.
Yes, I want to pick up on that point, Ken. Matures. When I started, I think on every podcast I say, when I started 2 decades ago, I need a bit of a stick, maybe. I went 2 decades ago. It was a cottage industry. It really was. It was good-hearted people who wanted to help others. There wasn't a huge amount of research or science around. And one supervisor covered everything. And now as we're understanding more about how human difficulty and trauma is experienced by people, and the if you like, the physiological aspects of it, and the different disciplines within counselling. You mentioned children, you might mention working with people who are non-English speakers, people of different cultures. We're now a more mature sort of body of people. We're not the same people we were 20 years ago. This is an emerged profession now, and as such, we need to think very carefully about our supervision and the fact that it's a lot more granular than ever before. Just to pick up on your point, Ken, on group supervision. One of the things about group supervision, it should be used, I think, in tandem with your personal supervision, because in group supervision, what tends to happen is you work with people who may be from other disciplines and say, I've tried this intervention, or I'm using this intervention, or I'm thinking of this theory. And I think there's a danger that you think, oh, I'm going to try that. That sounds like a really good idea. I'm going to try that with my client. I would say, take that to your supervisor, your main supervisor, and say, I'm thinking of working, I've been in group supervision. Someone's using, this intervention. I'm thinking of using it. And I think as a supervisor, I'd say, well, how much do you know about it? It's one thing talking about that in a group supervisory hour, but it's a whole different ballgame actually practicing it in front of a client. So I think the two things go hand in hand. I think group supervision can be very useful, but I also think there's a counterbalance where your personal supervision can kind of distill what you've learned in group supervision, and then you can think about maybe putting it on your CPD calendar, maybe gradually introducing a different intervention or a different approach to your client, and then working that through with your supervisor. It should be, I think, a gradual approach when you start to use different approaches. I know when I became a trauma-informed practitioner, I worked with my supervisor for a long time before I finally kind of distilled how I use that approach within my practice.
Yeah, just to kind of put the final dot on the I, cross on the T on the group supervision, the ethical organizations kind of show you that dilution of group supervision. So an hour and a half supervision one-to-one with a supervisor, just you and the supervisor, whether that be online or face-to-face in a room, is different to if you were in a group supervision in terms of how many supervision hours you can claim. And of course, there is an ethical imperative that we do a certain amount of supervised hours for the clients that we're seeing and the hours that we're working. So it's worth keeping that in mind. And I agree with what you're saying, Rory. I've been in both. I've been in group supervision and, of course, in the room face-to-face supervision. It can be a really rich and rewarding environment in group supervision. The dynamics in group supervision can mean that members of that group are informing the supervision process and maybe putting in their own ideas and thoughts and feelings and feedback. But having that peer, having that person that you can go to with your clients on a regular basis where you build up that relationship, that's so important. Yeah, so there it is. There's supervision that we've got a handout, because even in supervision, it's interesting, I work as a person-centered therapist. I worked as a person-centered therapist when I was practicing. I've stepped out now. And during that time, I had a number of different supervisors who had a core in person-centeredness, maybe some other elements in there as well. And they were all different in terms of how the supervision went. So every supervisor, I guess, brings themselves into that relationship in the same way as all person-centered counselors will be different for clients. It's the core modality that underpins that. And then within your supervision, there are three main areas, and we've got a handout about this, and that's why I'm covering it here. There are three main areas that you should be receiving in supervision, no matter what the modality of that supervision. And that is formative, so that's the supervisor sharing their experience to teach the counsellor. So in other words, informing your practice learning. You might be pointed to CPD on something that you bring in. So that is the formative. Normative, the supervisor asking the counsellor to account for and justify their work. And then restorative, supervisor offering support if the counsellor is struggling, either with an ethical dilemma, or maybe the counsellor is struggling with an element of their own life, or maybe something that a client brought up that brought something up up in you as the counsellor, you take that to supervision, and that is in the restorative area. So different kinds of supervision is really interesting. I think it's so massive, isn't it, supervision, Rory?
It is. It's such a huge area. I'm becoming, I think, more specialist as we move in. Yeah. And just to mention that handout, if you want that handout, if you go to counsellingtutor.com, which is our mother website, click the podcast tab, go to episode 253. That updated handout, because there's a lot of it has been rewritten to reflect the kind of more modern approach to supervision, is available for you. Episode 253, counsellingtutor.com, press the podcast tab, and you'll be able to download that super duper handout and have it to kind of ponder on when you're thinking about supervision. Yes.
Counselling Tutor offer clinical supervision training, which kind of gives you the competences to work face-to-face in a room, but also to supervise online practice. If you're not a supervisor and you're interested, you're mature in your practice, over 2 years of practice, member of an ethical body, working to an ethical framework, you can apply to join the next intake or get more information on our supervision training by going to counsellingtutor.com. And I'm also going to share that we have a brand new, about to release training program that is coming out, and this is for supervisors who have already trained to be supervisors. They're already proficient supervisors, but they haven't maybe done the competences that are required for supervising online practitioners. We will be offering that as a top-up to your supervision training to give you a certificate to be able to have those competences or evidence those competences in line with the framework requirements. It's interesting as the world changes, Rory, as our profession matures. It's great to be part of it. I'm loving this journey.
Absolutely, Ken. And as I said, we are a maturing profession now. Which is why when you work with colleagues in maybe social work or the medical world, they treat you as equals. And I think that is due to the fact that not to put too fine a point on it, we've grown up. We stand alone as a profession in our own right, and that's a brilliant thing. We're a matured profession. We're not emerging anymore.
Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. And as we move out of theory and practice, don't forget to go and get your handout, as Rory explained there. We're going to practice today. And in practice today, we look at contemporary issues, what's going on, contemporary challenges, wins, what's going on in counselling. And we can't ignore counselling in tough economic times. As we make this podcast, if you're listening in real time, you're not going to be no stranger to tough economic times, because it's all around us in the beginning of 2023, Rory.
It is, and this is a recurring topic of conversation that comes up in our Facebook group. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, go to Facebook, type in Counselling Tutor, you'll find us. Friendly group, knock on the door. We're a closed group, and our friendly moderator will let you in, and you can join thousands of like-minded people talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. We have students, huge amounts of student population. We have a lot of qualified colleagues, supervisors, tutors, and one of the things that seems to be a recurring theme within the Facebook group is tough economic times. And it's really interesting and saddening that, the economy of our country matches the mental well-being to a great extent. And, a lot of my colleagues, certainly those who are working in services, are seeing a rise in people coming through the door with, depression, anxiety, due to the state of the economy. People can't feed themselves, pay their heating. This causes impacts on relationships. So then you have people separating, that impacts on children. And, the whole thing is like a Jenga tower. You pull one piece out and the whole thing collapses. And within that is mental health. And I think I'd like to start this piece just by talking about how that might impact on those therapists who are working with clients. And one of the things is that for those who are working in services, they may see a reduction in attendance. More DNAs did not attend, we call them DNAs. And that can be because people can't afford the bus fare, or they pull in extra shifts, or they've got too much going on in their lives. And I think one of the paradoxes of this is that a lot of agencies, not all, but a lot, have a kind of 3 strikes and you're out policy. Mm-hmm. And when times get tough, people may not be able to attend therapy, and those strikes kick in, and before long, they're taken off the list or put to the back of the list again. And that can be so hard. It's something that's coming up in my supervision practice a lot, where therapists are going to the organisation and saying, "Going to have to look at this 3 strikes policy because the economic times are really impacting on how clients can attend therapy."
Definitely. I think this is an interesting topic, and just before we kind of started speaking about it, Rory and I had a quick discussion saying, what are we really going to say about this? Because there's not a huge amount of research that we can do, because this is here and now, it's happening. And as always, as Rory and I say, we're not the experts, we haven't got the answers, but we're sure here to have the conversation, because you're having the conversation, as Rory said, in the Facebook group, so we know it's important to you. And it hits all aspects, from training, the affordability of students. You may be a student, you're on a course, and it's expensive. The books are expensive, and your home bills are going up. It becomes tighter. And what does that bring up for you? And now you've got to get a supervisor for your placement, and you've got to do your own therapy. And I'm seeing more and more students explaining on the Facebook group, how they're struggling, and is there anybody willing to offer concessions? So that's within training. Then qualified practitioners, the costs of managing and running your practice, is it going up? Is enough coming in for you? We feel the squeeze. We all feel the squeeze. And then, of course, at client level, and you've mentioned, Rory, what does that affordability look like? A tank of fuel is no longer like a tank of fuel was a year ago. The bills are going up. And we often look at counselling in terms of the hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And the truth is, if you've got no food in your cupboard and you can't feed your child, then that becomes your primary focus. Your own well-being and mental health and emotional well-being gets kind of put to the side, and we may see clients not coming back to therapy or not engaging in therapy. Would we see a drop? And I don't know the answer. Would we see a drop in clients entering therapy? And then the other aspect is the organizations that you've spoken about, Rory, and that you may see those DNAs and that policy might need to be addressed. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because I was looking at a little bit of research by the World Health Organization, and they were suggesting, in tough economic times, it's time to revisit policies. It just is, because behaviors change as a result. There's an increase in alcoholism. You might have more clients speaking about spouse partner drinking, or themselves, to cope with what's going on. But also the organizations face potential funding cuts, because within the country, within the governments, less money is available, and usually that hits services, that money is taken away, so provision is taken away. What does it look like? I guess we just got to be aware of it, Rory, and have a think of how are we, as practitioners, as supervisors, going to work and progress in this what we find ourselves in now, this tough economic and challenging time. Do we offer concessions? Would that just further impact on us and our own ability to pay our bills? And it becomes this catch-22. But it's definitely something we have to look at. And I know in Counselling Tutor, it's something we're looking at very, very closely, because we have like the Counsellor CPD library for our qualified practitioners, which is a membership, it's a paid annual membership. And although being a member of that costs less than a cup of coffee, per month for the annual membership, we're noticing more people telling us that it's tricky, and they've got to cut their bills, and it just happens to be one of those. Same with our student resources, same with our trainings, and we're looking at where we can make concessions to help in those areas. And I guess in therapy too, do you offer those concessions? Does that impact you? It's a lot to think about.
It is, and I think one of the things we can do as therapists, and I think part of this is acknowledging there's a problem. Acknowledging there's a problem. Once we acknowledge there's a problem, we can think of creative ways of supporting our clients, because that's really what we're about. As professionals, our first kind of thinking is to our clients. And one of the things that I would be saying to supervisees is, if you've got a client who's presenting with a certain issue, and one of the things that comes up certainly in tough economic times is domestic violence.
Yes.
Have you prepared a little pack, a resource pack that clients can use, websites or forums or helplines or that type of thing, and maybe say, I have this information sheet that might be useful for you, and it's a bit of a fallback if they can't come to therapy. At least they've got something to use, and I think that's really, really important. It's probably something, if I'm honest, that I wouldn't have thought about in better economic times. If people come to therapy, they work it through, they see me, and hopefully they can make those decisions that change their lives. But when people might not be able to access the service, I think from a moral, I'm not sure about an ethical point of view, but from a moral point of view, I think just to have a bit of a resource sheet, and be able to give them a resource sheet so that they can look up the resources should they not be able to come to therapy, I think is really useful. Because if you think of it from the client's point of view, they go to therapy, they're working through, they can't afford, and there's a tendency for people to say, "Oh, I can't do that anymore," and then they go back to where they were, so close to getting the help they need. If they had some kind of resource sheet, phone numbers, contact numbers, that type of thing, it's probably not the ideal solution, but we don't live in a world of ideals, and it's something that can be a bit of help. So food for thought, I think.
Yes, I like that, Rory. Putting together resource packs, considering what kind of presentations we might see at this time. Maybe those clients that can't afford it, if we're not able to take them on a concession or drop the fee, being able to signpost them and at least give them some kind of support. And you're right, Rory, I'm just thinking now how that might be for that person that needs that help, that is living with that weight and that burden of whatever it may be, recent loss, grief, whatever they're going through, and they reach out and they can't afford it and they can't engage, and it feels to me it may add to the weight that they're already carrying. And this is, I guess, one of the things that I saw in the World Health Organization report, is that in tougher economic times there is an increase in suicide, people taking their own life as well. I think that one of the things that comes up for me that is to open the door to this topic, maybe when revisiting a contract with current clients, saying, I don't know how appropriate it would be to the client come in, sit down and go, well, how are you doing financially and economically? It might be a little inappropriate, but if you regularly revisit your contract's going to have your pricing in it, and you might revisit that and say, and we're contracted at this price over here, and I wonder how is that for you? And to open the door, we spoke recently about intimacy and sexuality, and opening the door is an important part where we show this is a subject you can speak to us about, rather than you get a DNA, you try and follow up with that client, they don't answer your calls, they don't answer your emails. Why? Because they're embarrassed. Why? Because they can't afford your fee and they don't want to let you down, or they don't want to tell you. That, I fear, could be a reality. So I think opening that door, letting clients know that this is a topic that they can gladly bring into therapy. And then, of course, as therapists, like you said, Rory, thinking what can we do? And what happens when a long-term client does say, I'm struggling to afford this now. How do we work with that?
Absolutely, Ken. And that could be not having weekly therapy, having it every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And working with client preferences. There's a big push on talking about client preferences. What do clients want? Not also imposing it has to be every week, because that's how therapy works. What is it the client wants? So having those open conversations with the client. And I've had clients say to me, "Oh, I was very worried about ending because I know this is your living, Rory, and you might not be able to buy your tea bags." They don't actually say tea bags, but you get the hang of what I'm trying to say here. And I often say, well, it's very thoughtful of you to think of me. I said, well, this is about you. And sometimes clients will feel that they've let you down because they are paying your wages. Certainly if you're in private practice, that's a thought to have should that come up in a conversation. But I think in tough and economic times, I think we need to broaden our thinking about how we can help. Our primary aim in being therapists is to help people. Yes, we need to look after ourselves, of course we do, but our primary aim is to be of help. And I think it's that conversation, maybe with a supervisor, maybe with colleagues. How can we extend that help? How can we perhaps blend it a bit more for clients who may struggle?
Yeah. And at the same time, I'm going to look at the flip side of the coin. We need to look to self-care first. You can't work for free. You can't be paying to go to work as well. You've also got your bills to pay and your life to live. And it's that balance. And like we said at the beginning, we don't have the answers, but we're certainly here to have the conversation. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback. What are your ideas of working with clients and yourself or your training during these tough economic times? And come and join the conversation. It's go on Facebook, put in Counselling Tutor, and come and join the conversations that are already going on about this subject. Well, there you have it. It's It is tough economic times. We move away into the CPD section of Counselling Tutor Podcast. It's Practice Matters. And today's special, I love these because this is where we get to see a peek into someone else's practice. You know your practice, you know what it looks like. You're there on a daily basis, weekly basis, or however you practice. But knowing what somebody else does in their practice, we don't get to see over somebody else's shoulder. It's kind of hidden from us. And Rory, you recently spoke to Ruth Hill, who is an REBT practitioner. And Ruth told you what her day-to-day practice looks like, what it's like to be an REBT therapist.
Absolutely. It's always a joy to speak to a colleague who uses a different discipline in therapy and a different theory and a different philosophy. And to understand how that's applied. There's one thing reading about it in the book, but the application of it is really how it, where the rubber hits the road, as we sometimes say on the podcast. So I was delighted to catch up with Ruth Hill, who's an REBT practitioner. I asked her about REBT. This is what she had to say.
Practice Matters.
The National Counselling Society is proud to sponsor Practice Matters. National Counselling Society are really excited to have launched their Children and Young People Therapist Register for counsellors working with the younger age group. To find out more, visit nationalcounselingsociety.org. nationalcounselingsociety.org.
There are many forms of psychotherapeutic theory that one can learn and apply to your client work. One of the perhaps little known and little lauded therapies that has stood the test of time is Rational Emotive Behaviour Therapy, REBT. It was developed by Dr. Albert Ellis. And he is a famous practitioner who, in fact, founded, if you like, a cognitive way of working with clients, a more cognitive approach. So I'm delighted to welcome Ruth Hill, who is a recently qualified REBT practitioner, who's going to share with us REBT and the approach it takes. So Ruth Hill, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to shed a bit of light onto REBT.
So my first question is, how does REBT and CBT, where do they sit? What's the history there?
The history is, you have to go back and look at Albert Ellis, who is the granddaddy of both of them, and Aaron Beck, who took the ideas and a lot simpler than it actually was. Basically, Albert Ellis is the grandfather of REBT. Aaron Beck took off in a slightly different direction. the CBT route. There's no disagreement between the two groups. The REBT therapists will use pure CBT when necessary. It's a very valued thing. So REBT is trying to encourage a philosophical change in an individual. So CBT will help them deal with the problem. REBT will go a bit deeper and look into what are the beliefs of that individual, because your belief will inform how you act. So I'll give you an example. If I said to you and 100 other people, the flight's been cancelled, how would the 100 people react? Some of them might feel overjoyed. They don't have to go. Some of them might be devastated that the journey, the holiday's been cancelled. The flight being cancelled hasn't changed. That's the same thing. But there will be 100 different reactions.
Yes.
And those reactions will be based upon the individual's belief.
And this links into one of the key philosophical ideas of REBT, which is drawn from Stoic philosophy, I believe, and I think it's Epictetus, if my northern vowels will allow me to wrap round that Greek name, who said men are not bothered or concerned about what's happened to them. It's their view of what's happened to them. In other words, using the plane analogy, the plane hasn't taken off. That's just one of those things, but it's how we view that and how we interject it into ourselves.
Exactly. Everybody will have a slightly different reaction. And that will be based upon their belief of what the flight meant.
Yes.
If you're very anxious about flying and you really didn't want to go, you're going to be very happy that you're not going. So in a previous podcast, you mentioned the car accident.
Yes.
And I thought I was trying to see that through an REBT lens. And I thought, what if the driver was a terrible driver and kept causing accidents? And they said, that's it, I'm a bad driver, I'm going to stop driving. Well, that's okay. That's a good thing.
Yes, that would be a good thing, wouldn't it? Yes.
But if they had their first accident, they became anxious and they wanted to drive and they couldn't, that's where you would do work. So it's not assuming anything, it's asking what's actually happening here.
Yes.
What are the feelings around this?
Yes, and for those of you who are interested in that, may have not heard that podcast, it was a story I told about witnessing a car accident where someone had pulled out from the side of the road and collided with another car. And it was interesting to observe the behaviour and the kind of worldview of each of the drivers. The person whose car had been hit, who had the right of way, shall we say, was quite philosophical, said, well, got insurance and no one's hurt, and the bumper will clip back on again, and went on their way after exchanging insurance details. The driver of the car who pulled out was saying things like, my car's ruined, I'll never be able to drive it, I'm a terrible driver, and also I'm going to have lots of accidents. And I just said, with a sausage roll in my hand because I was just going for lunch, I said, well, where's your evidence that you're a bad driver? Have you had accidents before? Well, no. I said, so this is your maybe the first one. People do have accidents. Mm-hmm. Where's the evidence that that your car won't actually drive now? Where's the evidence of that? Have you tried to drive it? Well, no. I said, well, give it a go. Just move it up and down a bit and see if it works. And the person said, I'm never going to drive again. And my question was, well, how are you going to get home?
Exactly. But it depends on their view of the accident.
Absolutely.
So I thought it was interesting that they might have been perfectly happy at not driving.
Right.
So I think that's part of the REBT ethos. It's that what's actually, every modality of therapy does this, what's actually going on here.
Yes. Yes, and that's something I'm not considered. I'm not an REBT therapist, and I certainly wasn't a therapist on the way back from Greg's with my with my sausage roll and my coffee. But there was someone in some distress, and just by taking a more helping them see a more stoic approach, it's actually working. The person actually got in the vehicle, took a bit of time to kind of settle themselves down, considered what I'd said, moved the vehicle up and down a bit, and then eventually just drove off. And I presume, I often wonder if they're listening. They might be listening, saying, "Oh, I remember him. He had a sausage roll and a cup of coffee from Greg." But that's the approach. But so what you're saying is that part of a person's philosophy in a case like that, if they've been to see a therapist, may be, well, I don't want to be a driver. I don't like driving. In which case, that's okay.
Yeah. So what you did was pure CBT. Look at the evidence here.
Yes.
And what I do, because this is what I'm trained to do, is, well, how do you feel about that?
Oh, so yes. So instead of
the immediate problem.
Yes. That's so fascinating. But the underlying issue might be that person really doesn't want to drive. In which case, that's okay.
That's okay.
That's okay.
If there's emotional disturbance, if there's unhappiness, that's where we step in. If there's not, crack on. It's another part of REBT is the understanding that we're going to have negative thoughts.
Yes.
We can't create a world where everything is going to incite happiness. So in REBT, we say that unhealthy negative thoughts and healthy negative thoughts are two sides of the same coin. Happiness is a completely different coin here. So a healthy negative thought, something's happened. Somebody might have had a bereavement. Somebody might be frightened of something. Things happen, bad, sad things happen. How do you deal with them? Do you go into a frightening situation with anxiety or with concern? So anxiety would be the unhealthy negative thought.
Uh-huh.
You're not going to be thinking straight. You're going to be trying to get away from it. You're going to be worrying about what else can happen, or going with concern. This thing's happening. Okay, I've coped with things like this. I'll cope with this. I'll get through it. A healthy negative thought.
Right, we've been here before. We've been here before. So it's rather like when I go to the dentist. I don't like going to the dentist, and that's driven from some negative experiences as a young child. I might have to say my therapist is lovely if she's listening. She's great, my dentist. However, I tell myself before I go that, the inconvenience and the slight distress I have about having my teeth looked at is probably going to be a lot less than the pain I will have if I don't. And I just have to kind of, suck it up, if you like. It's only 20 minutes in the chair, and then I can go for another 6 months. Is that the type of stoic approach that someone could take?
It's a very stoic approach. Another person's name to mention is Professor Wendy Dryden, who trained with Albert Ellis and knows everything about REBT. And he says, take the horror out of tragedy.
Oh, how fascinating.
You can't take the tragedy out of the tragedy. It's going to happen, but you take the horror out of it. Wow,
that's really insightful, isn't it?
It is, and and I think that's one of the REBT has these little punchy sentences that are so helpful there. That it's not a paragraph you have to remember. It's little lines that come back into your head that are really helpful.
Yes, and I think that's really, really interesting, because what I'm getting from this conversation is that I think there's a misnomer that CBT helps you, or cognitive approach will help you cope with negative thoughts and almost erase them. But what we're saying here is that we engage with the negative thought, we see them for what they are, but we try to work on the triggering aspects of it. and try to minimize it or accept it? Would that be a way of describing it?
Accept it. If you feel anxiety, you feel anxious. You and everything about REBT is about choices. You have a choice here. You can accept that I feel anxious about this. I don't like it, but it will pass. Or you can ignore it. But that's not a good path to take because it will be heard. It will be heard.
Yes.
So you're kind of kicking the can down the road. I can feel this anxiety now when I'm safe, when I'm grounded,
Yes.
when I'm able to process it. Or it can hit me when I'm walking along the pavement. That seems to be the part of the choice, that you hear the anxiety on your own terms.
Yes.
Or it's out of your control.
Yes, I like that. On your own terms. In other words, you have some agency over it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. That's the key, isn't it? You have agency. Yes.
Yeah. You're not pushing it away.
Yeah.
Because that won't work.
No.
I don't think anybody successfully pushed away anxiety and never had it come back again.
Yes. Yes, and revisiting my experience at the dentist, that's exactly what I do. I go down and I say, well, I've been before. It's going to be maybe a bit mildly uncomfortable, mildly inconvenient, but actually I'm still here. I'm not, I'm still here. I'm going to, this week it was cleaning, so I'm going to have, a film star smile. I haven't got a film star smile, but you know what I'm saying. And I went there, had the procedures done. Came out, the world really hadn't fallen in, but it wouldn't stop me feeling the same amount of trepidation again. But it's just accepting that that's just how it's going to be and work with it.
I don't know. The brain's an experiential learner. What you've done is you've faced up to something frightening and you've lived through it.
Yes.
So hopefully your brain might go, well, we put up some red flags.
Yeah.
You ignored those red flags. You went and did the thing and you survived.
Yes.
So maybe next time we might lower a red flag or two.
Yeah. Yeah, we could draw on that experience and say, well, maybe we could ask ourselves a fundamental question. Maybe it's not as frightening as I have made it out to be.
You survived it.
Ah, yes. Ah, right. Yes.
Because when the brain does its experiential learning, imagine if you swerved going to the dentist. You said, this is too scary, I can't go.
Yes.
Well, your brain would go, okay, you avoided that and you survived. That must have been a really scary thing.
Mm.
So it will flag it up as more frightening.
Yes.
So yes, basically everything is about acceptance and facing things.
Yes, I did hear an interesting story because of course Alice was rooted in Greek philosophy, and he talks about Marcus Aurelius, and of course Marcus Aurelius was a slave, and part of that was you were asked to do all sorts of things, and one was wrestling with the people who owned you, your master as it was, and he was doing some wrestling, and he said, if you keep pulling my leg like that, you'll break it, and that's what happened. He broke his leg, and he was like, well, I did say you were going to break my leg. You have broken my leg.
Again, acceptance.
Yes.
Acceptance isn't approval. It's just acceptance.
Yes. I think that's a really interesting point and something that's not often talked about in therapy, just accepting the situation. I think that sometimes there's a thought that it may be able to be stopped or cured or erased away.
Yep.
But what you're saying is that sometimes it's just accepting the situation.
Yeah, I don't think it's helpful to say it can be cured or erased away. It's, look, you're here. If you don't accept that you're here, how can you formulate a way out? How can you plan anything? How can you regulate anxiety? Because you're not living factually. But accept it. Accept it. This isn't what I wanted. This really isn't what I wanted. But at the moment, it's what I've got.
Yes.
That's a big thing in REBT. We talk about the difference between demands and preferences.
Oh, okay.
Because one of our unhealthy beliefs will always be a demand. This mustn't happen.
Ah, yes.
Or this must always happen. And it's a human thing. We're very creative and we learn, I would like this. Over time, we turn that into this must happen.
Yes.
And because we don't rule the world, we can't make things happen. This person must never leave me. This person must never die. I must never feel sick in public. I must never be upset. There's nothing to say that we can make that happen.
No.
So your demands are always unrealistic, inflexible, unhelpful. So one of the main pillars of REBT is to help the client to turn one of those rigid demands into a realistic, flexible, helpful preference.
As we come to the end of this interview, if you had one observation that may be useful for someone who's listening to this and, you know, maybe struggling with something that's happening to them, what would that be? What wisdom could you impart?
I think the acceptance is a big thing. Other people have probably been through this. You might be changed, but you'll get through it. And a learning experience. It's not the therapist sitting holding all the information and keeping secrets or not explaining everything's out there. Every question asked, I can explain why I'm asking that question.
Well, on that very philosophical note, we bring this interview to an end. So, Ruth Hill, thank you so much for joining us.
As always, a big thank you to Ruth and a thank you to you, Rory, for reaching out and giving us that peek into practice. This has been episode 253 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started off with theory and practice, different types of counselling supervision, and there is a super duper handout for that. Go to counsellingtutor.com, go to the podcast tab, click episode 253, and that handout is waiting for you. In practice today, we talked about issues of our times, and we talked about counselling in tough economic times. And Ken and myself just had a bit of a discussion about what we might do, how we might think, and the reality of being a counsellor, you know, in a tough economic time. And then finally, we met up with Ruth Hill, who talked about her practice of REBT. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.